Welcome to old friends and newcomers alike. We are, of course, gathered here to regale ourselves with frightful and horrific monster stories. But not just any monster. No, that just won't do. You feel the chill in the night wind. You hear the howling off in the cold, dark distance. And you are relieved that you found yourself in the warm and safe confines of hearth and home before nightfall. I'm Dr. William Lester. Blackwater Media presents Dogman Terror Anthology 5. During the fall of 2015, about a month before my family had planned to move to Maine from Kentucky, we had a brief but horrifying encounter with the Dogman. It was just about dusk, and I was outside with some of my friends playing, just tossing a football around. Anyway, after a while we got bored and decided to light a fire. We sat around, talked, told corny jokes, and laughed for a while. But then we started hearing noises in the woods, and the laughter died down. We all retreated around to the woodshed and armed ourselves with axes, pitchforks, and anything with a point or sharp edge before returning to the fire. About 10 minutes later, something rustled in the woods about 20 yards behind us, but no one dared to look and see what the hell it was. Finally, my friend Jeremy turned around to look, and the scream he let out could have brought down the barn roof. That's when we all turned around and saw the biggest goddamn dog or wolf we'd ever seen. It was down by the creek, drinking. Then it moved up on all fours and started sniffing around the barn. But when Jeremy screamed, the thing looked at us and stood up on two legs and snarled. Now, it was at least 7 feet tall. It was somewhat slim, but there was no doubt that this thing was powerful. You just got a sense of it. That's when my dad came out of the house with his shotgun and yelled, "What in God's name is going on out here?" We all just pointed and screamed. And then he looked at it and said, "Get the hell out of here," and shot at it twice. It ran into the woods yelping, as I think it may have been hit, and we all went inside and locked the doors. My dad sat in his rocking chair with the shotgun the whole night, and I swore I could hear scratching along the side of the house until daylight. Turns out when we went outside the next morning, there were claw marks all over the side of the house. After that, everything was quiet until we moved, and I've never seen anything like that since. And I damn sure don't want to. You think you know fear? You think that you know what it means to be a child and plagued by nightmares? You don't know shit. When I was 10 years old, I had a terrifying encounter with a creature that everybody today calls Dogman. I'm sure most people, or at least many people, laugh when they hear stories like these, but I just can't. I was face to face with what I can only describe as a werewolf in 1987 here in southern Georgia. Like I said, I was only 10, but I know what a big dog looks like, and I actually owned a huge German Shepherd named Sergeant at the time. And this thing that I saw dwarfed him. I was walking alone down a road that parallels some thick woods, and when I heard movement in the brush, I stopped and looked towards the noise, and to my absolute horror, a huge black wolf-looking head came out of the brush, and it was looking at me and letting out a low growl. Now, I don't know if it was on 2 legs or 4, but it was taller than I was. Suddenly, it came bursting out of the woods toward me, and I thought I was dead. I don't know what happened at that point, but obviously it didn't grab me. And all I can remember from that part is that it was in my face, and then it wasn't. My mom remembers seeing me tearing ass home with a look of terror, so she met me outside. She knew something bad had happened, but didn't know what it was. She says I was shaking uncontrollably. And to be honest, I even wet myself. And I just kept saying, "A werewolf just tried to attack me." Now, of course, she says she doesn't know what I encountered. But I was a tough kid who was always outside and wasn't prone to making up stories. She says the next day, I brought a book home from the school library titled Meet the Werewolf and became obsessed with anything werewolf related. I wouldn't go outside for a long time after that, even when all the other kids were outside. We moved the next year to a city 100 miles away, and I got back to, quote, normal again. Now, I moved back to that same rural town when I was 18, and I've lived there ever since. It's a small town on the Altamaha River called Jessup. I know what I saw, and I will never forget its face. And it wasn't a damn dog. I go into the woods quite a bit alone, and sometimes I get a little bit worried, but I also always carry a gun just in case. Listen to me. Be safe when you're out alone in these rural areas, in the woods, or whatever. These Dogman things are real. I know, because it almost got me. I had a very frightening encounter several years ago that I'd like to share with everyone. It was around 2015 or 2016. I remember it being summertime, and the trees and brush were still full and lush. My wife and I were living on 12 acres of land in Mount Juliet, Tennessee. The land was mostly wooded with maybe 3 acres around the home cleared out with the exception of randomly spaced trees. There were 2 acres in the front yard and about 1 acre in the back. The house was built in 1969 and the state of the home was very much original to the time period, down to that funky ass shag carpet. We originally moved in back in 2014, and over the years of living there we gradually worked on remodeling when we had the extra time and money. There were 2 small barns on the property and we turned them into chicken coops. We also decided to add a few sheep. Now, I have to tell you this. The home itself always had an unsettling feeling. And when we moved in, the basement had a dark, evil feeling. And we found a freezer full of animal carcasses and a gallon bucket full of frozen blood. But that's another story. So, over the span of living there, we had problems keeping our chickens alive. And we couldn't find out how something could be getting in there. One day we got home from grocery shopping in the early afternoon to find all of our chickens dead and spread across our backyard. Didn't make any sense. We had that heavy-duty hardware cloth wire caging that was torn like something clawed through it. We were concerned and not really sure about what to do. After all, we had the sheep to worry about too. I started sitting out at night and different times of the day when I had the time. I thought maybe I could hunt whatever it was that was killing our animals, but nothing ever showed up. We kept a close eye on our sheep the best we could and made sure they were well protected. That came to an end one morning when we went out to feed them and found them dead, torn to bits, and scattered all over the place. Not too long after that, I got a look at what was causing all the trouble. Like I said at the beginning, it was summertime, and I had the windows open because the AC wasn't working well on the second floor, and I wanted to get a breeze going through the house. My wife was at work, and I was busy putting our laundry away in the upstairs bedroom. Anyway, I started hearing this deep growl sound and a slightly higher pitch growl with it. It was coming from outside, and I couldn't tell what it was, so I stuck my head out the window to listen better. I could hear it coming from the woods on the right side, slowly getting louder, slowly getting closer to being in view. As the sound got closer, I felt my heartbeat picking up. I felt fear. I felt dread. And I was scared, but I wasn't sure why. That was until it came into the clearing. And there it was. A gigantic wolf walking across my front yard. It was walking on all fours. And it had a giant canine head and a slightly hunched back. It had a long, bushy tail, and its fur was thick on its chest and back, and it thinned out on the legs. As it was walking in the front yard, I was able to get a little bit of a measurement of it when it walked past a tree. It was at least 5 feet standing on all fours to its shoulders, so I estimated that it would have to have been 7 or 8 feet tall if it stood straight up. Now, a slightly higher pitch sound was coming from behind it, and following quickly on its heels was an identical creature, only much smaller. Even in that insane situation, I had enough of my wits about me to conclude that whatever these damn things were, it was clearly a mother and its young. Of course, I was frozen by what I was witnessing, and I didn't even think to try to photograph it. I guess in that moment, I didn't want to miss anything. It carried on across the front yard, going deeper into the woods, and just as it disappeared into the brush, I saw it stop momentarily and actually rear up on its hind legs, just for a few seconds, and it looked around. I remember thinking to myself, what in the goddamn hell did I just see? I told my wife about everything I'd seen, and she believed me straight away. I never saw it again after that day. Also, I never went outside without a firearm for protection after that. We ended up moving out of there in 2018. So now when I see and hear people on social media screaming and arguing about whether or not a creature like Dogman could exist, I just kind of shake my head and laugh to myself, because you see, theories are fine, conjecture is fine, but seeing is believing. Hey everybody, this is Dr. William Lester, and I want to tell you about a new membership opportunity from Blackwater Media. Now yes, you can sign up for the regular Swamp Hunter Society membership at $4.99 a month and have access to the premium content. But you also have the option of getting the Blackwater Media VIP full year membership. That's right, with a one-time payment of just $49.99, you can have the same access to the same premium content, early releases, at a savings of almost $10 off of a regular membership. So if you enjoy the finest in paranormal and cryptid horror, head on over to blackwatermedia.net and get your Blackwater Media VIP full year membership. I'd like to take just a few minutes to share an extraordinary experience with everyone. My girlfriend and I live in rural northern Michigan. The closest town is about 20 miles away, and the next closest is almost double that. We live right next to a huge national forest, so there's plenty of wildlife all over the place. Anyway, my girlfriend works nights and has for most of our relationship. She's a night shift nurse at one of the few hospitals within a 50-mile radius. I would often take her to work and pick her up, so we were on the road at night a lot. One night a few weeks back, I was headed to get her from the gym, which she would sometimes go to after her shift. I had our dogs with me, a 2-year-old Doberman and a 14-year-old Husky. We came around a corner by our neighbors, and they have a large pasture with one horse in it. Now, never in 4 years had I ever seen that horse out of his barn past nightfall. He comes and goes, in and out of his shed with the rising sun and with nightfall. You can see into his shed as you round the corner. We got to the tree line on the back of the pasture, and I saw something completely insane. It looked like a horse, but from the second I saw it, I knew it wasn't a horse. It was 4:30 a.m., and I'd just seen him in his shed. All my hair stood up, and my heart beat like a drum, and I got a very, very weird feeling. Also, I had to tap the brakes because we were approaching a stop sign. I looked over at my Doberman in the passenger seat to see him with all his hair raised and his teeth bared. He let out a guttural growl that I could feel in my chest. Now, I could remember the only other time I'd ever seen him like that was the day my father was walking around our backyard one evening, and he didn't know he was out there. He's a very docile dog, and it takes a lot to get him worked up. I had goosebumps and chills the whole 20 miles to town. Now, in terms of what I saw, like I said, it was the size of a horse, but it was actually something that I could only describe as a humongous wolf. It sounds incredible, I know, but that's exactly what this damn thing looked like. Aside from its size, I can remember getting a really unsettling feeling by the look of its eyes. They were a weird haze of orange and yellow, and there was nothing good in them. When I told my girlfriend about it, she almost immediately uttered 2 words that I wish I'd never heard: Michigan Dogman. But from there, things just got more bizarre. Just a few days ago now, my girlfriend was on her way home after work and the gym, one of the few times that she drove herself, when she came across something terrifying. She said she saw what looked to be a fairly large deer eating some trash that had been knocked over from a trash can at the end of a driveway. She didn't think anything of it until the deer stood up on its hind legs and walked across the road into the trees. She said when it stood up, she could notice that its face was horribly distorted with hideous gaping teeth and sunken eyes. Now, like I said, she's an experienced nurse, including the ER, and she's seen a lot of disturbing things. And yet, I have never seen her more nervous or rattled by anything in our 4 years together. She literally had goosebumps, which was the first time I've ever seen her have those either. When she told me the story, it scared the shit out of me, especially in conjunction with what I'd seen, and it only deepened my sense of horror. I don't want to speak the name of the creature I believe it to be, but Dr. Lester included it in the title of this story. Recently, there was a big-mouthed neighbor out here blabbing loudly about these creatures. We told him to shut the fuck up and stop giving these things recognition, because recognition is energy, and we've seen where that gets us. There's a lot of legends and stories that come from this part of Michigan. Even stories of Sasquatch pop up now and again. The old folks seem to know a lot. It's frightening to realize how many of these things exist in such close proximity to our home. Now, I'm weary of all the wildlife I see in the area. Every yelp, hoot, or howl has me looking out the window scanning the landscape, especially when the sun goes down. Like all of you, I've heard the phrase, things that go bump in the night, a million times. Now that I know that those things are real, the phrase takes on a whole new meaning. I'd like to tell everyone about two instances in which I witnessed creatures that everyone today refers to as Dogman. Back in 2013, when the incidents took place, I don't think anyone was even using the word Dogman. Of course, I'd heard of Bigfoot. There always seemed to be something on TV, and I knew that sightings went back for decades, if not further. But prior to my experiences, I'd never ever heard anything about large bipedal wolf-like creatures existing. In fact, if I hadn't seen it for myself, I'd have probably thought the whole thing was batshit crazy. Anyway, I live in North Georgia, not too far away from the Kennesaw Mountain National Battlefield. It's a beautiful area and attracts I don't know how many thousands of visitors each year. At that time, I worked nights, which meant driving down a few really dark stretches of road. Well, on one particular night, I was going down one of those dark lengths of highway when I saw two deer make a dash across the road. Now, I'd seen deer lope or run across roads many times before, but there was something really strange about these two deer. I tapped the brakes to slow down, and at that moment, I saw what was pursuing the deer. They looked canine, except they were bipedal and incredibly large. I could see that they were each between 6 and 7 feet tall, and they chased the two deer, which were both smaller by the way, out across the street and into the woods. And these damn things ran in formation, like one in front and two behind, kind of next to each other. And they were roughly 30 to 40 yards behind the deer. And these things were muscular and fast, and I mean lightning fast. I could also make out that their fur was either very dark brown or black. Looking back on it, I think maybe I was in a mild state of shock at the time, because I just sat there in the car for several minutes, staring wild-eyed out into the darkness. And the crazy thing is, like it could get any crazier, right? That wasn't even my last experience. It was only a couple of weeks later when I was once again heading home. As I drove past a cornfield, which was off to my left, something ran out in front of my car. Now the field had full-grown corn stalks, but I don't know exactly the heights, only that the corn stalks were taller than me by a head, and I'm just over 6 feet tall. But this time, I saw two more creatures. They were essentially similar to the ones I'd seen earlier, large, fast, canine bipeds. And these things basically jumped the road, broke the corn, and landed 10 or 15 feet into that field on the other side and just kept running. This time I took special note to look at the fur. One was black, and the second one was black with white or silver streaks on its chest and back. Since the first three I saw were all one solid color, I thought that must mean that there were at least 4 different of these creatures. Now, since that time, I've seen a number of photographs online that are purported to be Dogman, but for the most part, you can't really make out anything definitive. But I'll tell you this, once you've seen these creatures, once you've seen what they're really like and what they can do, you don't want any part of it. And you damn sure don't need convincing that they're real. Sometimes, over the course of one's life, there exists the possibility of experiencing or encountering something beyond belief, beyond understanding, and perhaps even beyond explanation. And that experience changes a person forever. I live and work in the city of Atlanta. 7 years ago, I inherited a house and about 30 acres of property near the city of Macon, which is about 85 miles south of Atlanta. I came to decide to use the house as a retreat, a place that would serve as a getaway so that from time to time I could get out of the city to relax unwind, and perhaps do some fishing. The house was a small but tidy, comfortable ranch style and was situated almost at the center of the property. The land itself was just west of the Ocmulgee River. East of the river lay the Ocmulgee Mounds National Historic Park. Many different native cultures had occupied the area since at least the Ice Age, and the mounds themselves had been constructed around the year 900. Within the confines of the park, there are 7 mounds. Anyway, 3 years ago, my girlfriend and I decided to spend the Labor Day weekend at the house. We both got off work early that Friday, and since we'd already gotten our things together, we got in the car, loaded cooler and all, and hit the highway. Before getting to the property, we stopped in town to do some grocery shopping for the long weekend. Primarily deli sandwiches for that night, and a big bag of charcoal, a couple of steaks and chicken wings, and a big tub of potato salad for the rest of the weekend. Anyway, we got to the house, settled in, and enjoyed sandwiches and coffee. That first night came and went as planned, and with no indication or even hint of what was to come. The next day, we visited the park to see the historic mound sites. We walked a couple of the trails, snapped some pictures, and generally soaked in the surroundings. We weren't out there that long. Middle Georgia can be quite warm in early September, and we were both looking forward to an afternoon and evening of cocktails and steaks on the grill. Later on, back at the house, I prepped the grill while my girlfriend, her name is Kelly by the way, got the steak seasoned up and ready to go. We set up a couple of tables on the patio, and after the grill was lit and the steaks were on, we lit 3 or 4 of those outdoor candles that are supposed to keep mosquitoes away, and I turned on the stereo. Anyway, the dinner was fantastic, and as afternoon grew into evening, we enjoyed the drinks and music as the sunset gently gave way to late summer darkness. It was then in full darkness that the pleasant tranquility of the night was shattered by a horrific sound coming from the surrounding woods. We just looked at each other, bewildered by the howling that cut through the air. It wasn't a coyote or dog. It was too loud and deep. And I was like, what the fuck? And just as those words came out of my mouth, Kelly came up out of her chair and pointed to the wood line slightly to our right. Now I'm going to do my best to describe to you exactly what we saw. This thing was incredibly tall with long, thin legs and arms. I'm estimating 10 to 12 feet tall. It had clawed hands and its legs were hocked out like a canine. Its head and face were also canine-like, and it was covered in what looked like badly matted dark brown or black hair. But the eyes, holy shit, the eyes were insane. They were huge, bulging, and white, and seemed like the size of softballs. It was almost as if they were too big for their sockets and were extending way out of the creature's face. It was an absolute goddamn nightmare. We watched it there at the edge of the tree line. It seemed to sway in one direction and then momentarily to the other. We could hear the sound of its shuffling feet and a low rumbling growl. It was almost as if the creature was hesitant to break the wood line, even as if it were somehow being held back or restricted from moving beyond that point. Then, as we watched, the creature ambled back, further and further until it disappeared from out of view back into the forest. A few moments after that, we heard another bone-chilling howl, the sound of which indicated that the thing was moving off in the distance. Although we stayed there for the rest of the holiday weekend, we didn't see or hear anything else that could be considered strange or even out of the ordinary. Since that time, Kelly and I have talked about it from time to time, and whenever it comes up, she refers back to our visit to the Ocmulgee Mounds. She had the idea that some way, somehow, something had been disturbed there, something that was better left undisturbed. You know what? I think she's right. And I also think that although the thing terrified us, compared to what might have happened, we got off easy. At first, I thought it was a nightmare. In truth, it really was. Not in the sense that it was merely the product of the subconscious mind, but in the sense that I was filled with the most intense feeling of terror that I'd ever experienced. It happened one summer night almost 10 years ago now, although it seems somehow that it could not have been that long ago. Sometimes I feel as though time has been twisted, warped, and contorted to the extent to which I've resorted to actually writing down the dates and times of significant events, just to be sure. I awoke with a start, as if I'd been shaken into consciousness by an invisible force. From the moment my eyes opened, I was gripped by feelings of isolation, loneliness, and fear. It was as if I existed alone in the universe, floating in an endless sea of darkness. Still, I could hear the faint sound of the radio on the nightstand to my left. A dim orange light on the dial gave me a moment of comfort. Then my eyes were drawn to the foot of my bed, and standing there, grasping the railing, was a thing. A terrible thing that could not possibly exist. And yet there it was. It was built like a human, but its body was covered in very dark fur. Its head and face were wolf-like. Its mouth was open slightly, and it displayed sharp canine teeth and a sort of menacing feral grin. It stared at me intently with a pair of hellish yellow eyes, and I could swear that in my mind, I could understand exactly what it was thinking. There's nothing you can do to stop me. I am eternal. I am fear in the night. I could hear the creature breathing, or what I took to be breathing. It sounded like a low, rumbling growl. And there seemed to be also waves of heat hitting me, like when you check on something that you have in the oven. I felt as if this thing was trying to drown me somehow in evil energy. Then I remembered something that I'd read somewhere, something about driving away negative entities. I tried to fight back my fear. I imagined my room being filled with a golden light, a light of power and strength, a light of love and hope, the light of all lights. It was then that the look in the wolf thing's eyes changed. It was a look of unimaginable fury and hatred, and also fear. Then it started to slowly fade from the center of its chest out until it was gone. And I remember that the last of it that I could see was the expression of diabolical spite on its face. I never saw it again. I have no idea what it was that visited me that night. A demon wolf, a spectral or elemental being, some kind of strange alien thing. I just don't know. But there's one thing I now know for sure. Something that I'm forever grateful for. Even in the face of that which creepeth by night, I am never, ever alone. You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. My experience with Dogman began with the decision that I made to build a fence around the back part of my property. I live about a half an hour north of the city of Atlanta, and the backside of my property butts right up against a wooded area. Not really the woods the way you might think, but like I said, a wooded area. Anyway, my plan was to fence in about 6,000 square feet and more or less create a backyard type environment, patio, fire pit, and one of those above ground swimming vistas. Summer was coming on, and when my nephews came to visit, I wanted the kind of backyard area that they could hang out, have fun, and be safe. The first thing I had to do was to clear about 10 yards leading up to the wood line. When fenced in, that area would be the line that separated the backyard from about 100 yards or so of trees and brush. So I called a guy that I knew named Wilson, who had done landscaping for me for a number of years. I knew that he would be able to handle the clearing and the fence installation without charging me into oblivion. On some jobs, Wilson would bring out an extra man, sometimes two, depending on the amount of work that was necessary. There were also 4 or 5 small trees that I wanted to cut down and cut up to be used as firewood. By the time the fall weather set in, I'd be all set. They arrived on the following Wednesday morning. I saw that Wilson had 3 men with him. That meant that he didn't intend for the work to take any longer than necessary. He was like that. They got started by 10 o'clock, and for the next several hours, I could hear the sound of their equipment from my office upstairs, where I drank coffee and caught up on some work of my own. They worked until 4, and I met Wilson at the back door. He told me they'd be back at it in the morning. So, day 1 went off without a hitch. The next morning, the men were back at it, and they worked for several hours. I had already cleared a space against the back outside wall of the house for firewood, and 2 of the men had begun stacking it there while Wilson and the others continued the clearing. Like the previous day, things were moving right along. Next morning, however, all that came to a screeching halt. It started with Wilson knocking on the back door and asking me to come out and look at what he'd found in the work area. And when I saw the look on his face, I knew instantly that whatever it wasn't going to be good. Now let me tell you something. What I saw when I got around to the area that Wilson and his men were clearing out was the weirdest Twilight Zone, X-Files type shit I'd ever seen in my life. There were 3 logs standing there as if they'd been propped up by someone during the night. And wedged down in the center of them was the head of a deer. From what I could see, the head didn't appear to have been cut off, but ripped or torn savagely off the body. Bits and strings of bloody flesh and entrails dangled below it. And flies buzzed and darted all around, and there was this goddamn stench that was 10 miles past description. Wilson looked at me and said, "I don't know what the fuck's going on out here. Either the white folks are trying to run you off, or somebody's trying to put some roots or some kind of hoodoo shit on you, man. Either way, we're leaving. Send a check for the 2 days when you can." Then they loaded all of their equipment onto Wilson's truck, climbed in, and pulled off. I thought about taking the head into the tree line and just burying it, but to be honest, I was scared even to touch it. I mean, who the hell would do something like that unless they were into some deep, crazy psycho shit? So there I was, no fence built, piles of firewood, and a damn severed deer head. And that's not even the crazy part. That night, I'm down in the den, going back and forth between some on-demand movies and the baseball game. I had the window open because it was a little cooler than normal and there was a breeze rolling in. Then out of nowhere, I heard something that made me jump right up out of my chair. It was a loud, reverberating howl, and it reminded me of the howl in The Wolfman. You know that one with Benicio del Toro? There was an anger to it, a rawness that's very hard to describe. What's not hard to describe, however, is that it was absolutely horrifying. I looked out the window, and after 10 or 15 seconds, I saw what I at first thought was a person out near the deer head. And I thought, oh shit, I'm going to have to get my pistol and go out here and confront whoever the fuck this was. But then it became obvious that it was not a person. It was an animal with canine features. But that didn't make any sense because it was standing on two legs. Its fur was dark and its head was massive, like maybe 3 times the size of a large German shepherd, with a long ass snout and 2 ears pointing straight up over its head. So there I was, feeling like I was thrown into some horror movie, and I couldn't take my eyes off of that creature. Then I realized this giant wolf thing was responsible for the deer head. It was meant to scare Wilson and his men away. It was meant to stop the work. Maybe I'd inadvertently violated what the creature considered to be its territory. As all of that ran through my mind, I saw the creature pick the deer head up, turn around, and walk back into the tree line. After that, I made myself a scotch and sat back down in my chair. I don't know exactly what time I dropped off to sleep, but I woke up just after 8 the next morning to the sound of rain. I sat there for a few minutes before getting up to go to the kitchen to make some coffee. Since that time, I haven't seen or heard anything strange around my property. There's still no fence back there, and there's not going to be. No more clearing out brush and no more cutting down trees. And most of all, no more border disputes with Dogman. Where do I begin? What I'm about to share with you took place in 2018. I arrived in this small rural town called Cape May. The company I was working for at the time was sending me out to go door to door advertising cable and Wi-Fi that they wanted me to sell. Now I was getting weird vibes all throughout that day, as the town itself was very small and a bit creepy, with people staring at me or giving me the cold shoulder for the entire day. It seemed like a lot of townsfolk that I encountered that day were on the edge, and it was weird. There was a tense atmosphere that I shrugged off, as people are weird all the time. I continued doing my job, chugging a Red Bull to keep me going, which surprisingly didn't affect me at all. Besides the weird atmosphere, the scenery was actually quite nice once you got off the main road. I had to stop at different streets, and some were in the woods on long and seemingly picturesque, endless roads. It was quite scenic. Just before sunset, I was scheduled to visit a few houses on a small peninsula. Now, to get to this peninsula, you had to go down a very long road past a summer camp area, past a trailer park, past the woods, and then you finally found yourself in a small open area with a bay marsh, a couple of expensive houses, and shore access. The houses were so close to the water it seemed to be a code violation, but I was pretty sure they were built to withstand storms since they looked so expensive. Every house had its own theme, and the area was mostly deserted. Only one house had someone inside, whom I talked to after knocking on its door. I was so distracted looking at the houses and scenery that I didn't notice how fast sunset was approaching. I came to the realization that I should start heading back to avoid being alone on that long deserted pathway in the woods. Now, to be honest, I was never one to feel comfortable after dark and isolated places, especially without cell service. So I was making my way down the path, so far so good, and it wasn't completely dark yet. As I approached the wooded area of the road, I was walking a bit faster since there were no street lights and the sunlight was rapidly disappearing. So as I was walking along at a decently fast pace, I noticed something. The woods were eerily quiet. All the life that I'd heard before was gone. No crickets, no birds, just pure silence. I stopped in my tracks and got chills down my spine as I felt the feeling that I was being watched. I looked around the dark woods for any sudden movements, and then, like clockwork, something up ahead made its way out of the tree line. It looked to be some kind of large animal, and my brain went into overdrive, analyzing whatever this animal might be. Was it a bear? A deer? No. It looked like a large dog. But dogs couldn't get that goddamn big. Nowhere, no how, and under no circumstances. Although I was intimidated by its large size, whatever it was hadn't noticed me. Even though I was scared, I also didn't want to walk back and go into that one man's house that I'd spoken to. I didn't want to hear any shit about being from the city and freaking out by the least little thing out in the wild. I just didn't want to hear it. Now, while I'm thinking about this, the large animal in the distance had finally noticed my presence. It was observing me, not entirely sure of what to do with me. There wasn't much light anymore, but I could definitely detect a canine-type face. Whatever I was looking at was definitely too big to be a black bear with a shoulder height of at least 5 feet on all fours, which is comparable to the size of a brown bear. The mass of this creature was extensive, as the outline of what I could see looked like a wolf on steroids. It was muscular as hell. I also noticed that the outline of its face was very similar to that of a German shepherd or a wolf, as it had perked ears and a long snout. In the heat of the moment, I could only hear the sound of my heart palpitating as fear and adrenaline started to crawl its way into my bloodstream. I felt as though time were standing still, and then it dawned on me. What I was looking at was not a normal animal, and it was simply too goddamn big to be any animal that I could recognize from the damn New Jersey catalog of fauna. And if it wanted to attack me, I would have been powerless against it. It was just too big. And I tried to calm myself down. I thought of the idea that this creature was out of the ordinary because I could rationalize it somehow. I made my brain go back to the idea of this being maybe a large dog or coyote. I also at the time did not think there was anything to the idea of cryptids. For the most part, I was completely unaware of what size coyotes are supposed to be anyway, so I made a quick decision. Realizing that this could very well be a life or death situation, I came to the conclusion that this very large dog-like creature was probably a skittish coyote that I could scare off, at least temporarily, to calm down my nerves. I mean, think about it. What the fuck other choice did I have? The longer I kept standing there, the more aggressive I might come across to this animal. And I didn't want it to get territorial or get the idea that I was easy prey. So guess what? I decided I would make the most hideous, loud, confusing, and startling scream or howl I could muster and just sprint the rest of the way. After I hollered and yelled as hard as I could muster, the animal quickly changed its body language to defensive. And then it quickly changed its mind to deciding I maybe wasn't worth a fight, and it ran a decent distance into the woods, but not too far. But here's the shit. It ran upright on 2 legs, and I thought to myself, what the fuck is going on out here? I decided to sprint as fast as I could past that area and beyond. I sprinted until I reached the end of the road and noticed there was that summer camp area with street lights. I rested on the top of a table, out of breath and feeling my heart pound out of my chest. I was shaken up, but I still had that feeling that I was being watched. So I kept my eyes on the tree line. I was looking for any sign that that creature might still be out there. Once I felt like the coast was clear, I located the next house I was scheduled to visit, and I quickly made my way over. I met a nice family who ended up buying cable from me, and I told them what happened to me that night, and also how I was treated by the locals. The lady of the family, who I presumed to be the mother, said, "I don't know why they sent you out here alone. These woods are dangerous after dark, and there are creepy people who live around here." Now, the impression she was giving me was that there were animal encounters she couldn't explain. And also there were lots of ex-convicts in the area, and people who should have been arrested, but haven't been. And she was also concerned about animals, as she said that there were pets, dogs and cats, gone missing, never seen again. And that gave me goosebumps too. How many times over the course of the day was I in real danger? Anyway, they were extremely concerned for my safety and told me to contact my team leader so I could get picked up. They said they didn't want me to go outside again and that I should call it quits for the night and not go to any other houses. And to this day, I still have no idea what that creature was. But from what I've read on the internet, people are calling it Dogman. There are strange things in the woods, things that people don't talk about, and sometimes even try to cover it up. I felt like the town folk knew something about what I encountered. And I tell you, this is some shit I don't ever want to have to deal with again. The incident that led to the story that I want to share with you happened in late summer 2018. It was in the mountains of North Georgia. I'm a surveyor with 20 years experience in Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, and North and South Carolina. So I'm extremely comfortable in the woods as I spend so much time outdoors, most of that time being very far back in the forest. A great deal of it is on national forestry land. Now, it wouldn't be unusual to not see anyone for days at a time. On the day it happened, I was surveying a piece of property around a small Corps of Engineers lake bordering a large tract of national forest land. I was operating a robotic survey total station, which means you don't need a partner to run a survey crew, and instead of having 2 or 3 people on a crew, you generally work alone. The property was fairly large, approximately 500 acres made up of mostly steep mountains and hollows covered in dense mountain laurel. Now, I just finished up cutting a traverse line along the property line, running to the top of the ridge, roughly 350 to 400 feet away with my machete. Traverse lines are typically about 5 feet wide and cut as close to the ground as possible to ensure a line of sight for the instrument. I just walked back down the slope to get ready to traverse to the top of the ridge when I noticed someone or something hairy wearing what I originally thought was a hat slowly walking along the opening that I just made a few minutes earlier, and stopped to look at me. It had a large hand reaching up to grab the tree limb it was next to. At the time, I thought someone must have been walking or hiking to the top of the ridge, as it's not uncommon, despite the isolation, to see people from time to time. But then I realized it was way too fucking hot to be wearing a large, shaggy brown jacket, as it was in the high 90s. And as it started downhill at me, I could make out pointed ears on the top of its head and a long snout. This thing could only be described as a gigantic wolf. I can't stress how fucking big this thing was. Even from the distance that we were apart, I could hear it letting out a low rolling growl. And after a few minutes, it slowly walked out of sight. Now at this point, I took out my headphones and started paying closer attention to the situation. As I took out my headphones, I realized it was dead silence in the woods, and in Georgia during summertime, it's always extremely loud with insects. I waited a few minutes and walked to the top of the ridge to grab my equipment, which I had seriously considered leaving, to see what's going on, and noticed disturbed vegetation leading in the direction I saw it walking. Thinking harder about what was happening, I realized that the lower limb on the tree I saw it walk behind as it went out of sight was right at 6 feet tall, and what I originally thought to be a jacket had to be fur. That's when it all kicked in, and I got scared. I could hear something moving in the short distance coming from the area it walked to, so I was like, shit. I decided to start making the 45 to 50 minute walk back to the truck. Then I started hearing movement up on the ridge, parallel and above me during my walk back. I didn't think the creature was moving in reaction to me necessarily, but I damn sure wasn't willing to wait around and find out. I made it to the truck, and since then, I've only told 2 people about my experience. That was pretty much it as far as the encounter went. I know it wasn't a bear. I've been around them my whole life and seen them plenty of times. There was no mistaking what I saw for a bear. On top of that, I've been into the deep woods on many occasions and experienced all sounds and signs of life, and I've never seen them just disappear at the drop of a hat. I carry a pistol every day, and on some occasions, a short rifle if the job calls for it, due to bears, wild hogs, finding illegal pot growing operations, etc. But I can tell you, on the day I saw this creature, my weapon brought me zero comfort. I was scared to my very core. And I have a new sense of respect for the woods now. I'd advise that if you work alone in the woods, please pay attention to your surroundings. I think a lot about what might have happened if I hadn't looked up when I did, or if I'd been a little slower walking back downhill. If that goddamn thing had wanted to get me, I wouldn't be here today. I know now I was in just a few yards of a creature up on that ridge with no idea I was being shadowed by a monster. You know, people go missing all the time in the woods and are never seen again. And now I believe I know what takes some of them, because I've seen it. Now, whether you believe me or not is of no consequence to me. But it took me a long time to feel comfortable telling anyone about my experience. If it helps one person pay attention in the woods, I'd be happy to be called crazy over it. But as far as I'm concerned, it was a goddamn nightmare.